let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. How you doing?
Good morning.
Good. Yeah, first of all, got some finally some exciting news, actually really great news. I've been talking to you about the possibility or the printing of the new version of the In the Beginning book by Walt Brown. This is what I'm teaching out of the class. It's about the hydroplate theory, which I think is by far and away the most scientifically accurate and biblically accurate flood model. So this edition was printed in 2008, and Dr. Brown had made lots of revisions to it since then, before his passing. Unfortunately, back in September, he did pass away. And so there's rumors of a 9th edition coming out, and been for quite a long time. And I talked to them about some of the setbacks that they had, and different reasons it took so long to come out, but it's available to order now. So, and I've ordered a copy of it, and I'll bring it in when we get it, so I can show it to you, but it should arrive probably early February, and it's pretty interesting. There's also what's called a flip book version of it online now. So if you go to the Hydroplate website, it's actually Dr. Brown's website. It was called creationscience.org or .com. I can't remember now which, but I'll put a link of it in the video for the class too, so you can see that. Oh, I need to get up on the computer here too. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So anyway, on the line there's actually what's called a flip book version of it too, which is really neat because it looks like a real book online. You can easily flip the pages using your mouse. You can type in a keyword as a search feature, so if you're looking for something specific subject or something, it can bring up every reference that's in the book really quickly. It's much better than the previous version that was online. But it's been online for a long time. It's been available, obviously, totally for free for anybody who wants to do it. But then you can click on each reference. It takes you right to the page. It is so easy. It's really, really nice. It's very well done. And I would encourage you to check it out. It is fantastic. So then also in early December, they had the second Hydroplate conference. They had one in 2023, where they had a lot of speakers that gave presentations on various aspects of the hydroplate theory. And so they did another one in 2025 in early December. And I'll put a link to that too. And I'll have Rich put a link to that in the comment section of the class when it gets up on our church website. So there's a lot of really interesting and very exciting things happening with hydroplate theory now too. There's also a sneak peek on the website of a potential film that's going to be coming out that'll go over hydroplate theory, and also talk of a small booklet form, be much smaller, probably a lot easier, which I think would be great, because a lot of people who are not familiar with this theory find the book overwhelming, and it is. There's a lot to it. I mean, there's quite a bit to it, and as you'll see going through the class, I can't even cover it all. There's so much to it. But what makes me excited about it is that there's so much of it that is scientifically sound and biblically accurate that gives me great confidence that this is the right theory. This is the correct flood model. So again, in previous classes we talked about the 3 flood models that are out there in the creation circles. There was the vapor canopy theory, which has been pretty well discredited. In fact, Dr. Brown discredited it, showed it why it wasn't scientifically viable. I will be covering sometime in the next 4 or 5 probably classes. I will be covering what's called the plate tectonic theory, and a sped up version of that for creationists called the catastrophic plate tectonic theory, which also has really significant scientific issues and problems. So that leaves the hydroplate theory really the only one, and this one does. I mean, it just meets all these different aspects of what you would expect, biblically accurate and scientifically accurate, and also makes a lot of predictions. Dr. Brown makes a lot of predictions in the book too, about 60 different predictions, and about 35% of those predictions, or somewhere in the 20-25 or so of the predictions have actually been confirmed to be accurate. So that is a very good sign of a very robust theory, is that when you can make predictions, and those predictions are later found to be right, it gives you a lot of confidence that you're on the right track here, you're at the right theory here. So anyway, a lot of cool stuff to talk about, a lot of interesting things related to hydroplate theory. And we'll go through a little bit later some more of these things as well. But last week, we just want to briefly touch on what we did last week. We had a discussion about intelligent design, and we talked a little bit about what that is. And then we also talked a bit about how there's been polls in the last 15, 20 years or so that have shown a rapid decline of belief in God. Pretty stunning, actually, starting around 2010. There was almost a 10% drop in belief in God by several of these polls, and they showed that it was mainly attributed to the 18 to 30-year-olds, which are now called the Gen Z generation. And in looking in this, I talked a bit about a video that was online from Stephen Meyer, who's a very well-known proponent of intelligent design. He's got several really good books that I would encourage you to check out as well. But he noted in this video that around 2007 there became a genre of books released by a group of atheists that were dubbed the New Atheists. And this included people like Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking and Bill Nye, the unscience guy I call him, and others who wrote a series of books that were, hey, if you believe in creation, if you believe in God, you're a fool, you're an idiot, you're stupid. I mean, it's this kind of stuff. And they tried to say there's no scientific evidence supporting creation or supporting what the Bible says. And this isn't the first time, I mean, this didn't start with them. I mean, creation has been under attack since the mid to late 1800s, when Darwin and Karl Marx and Freud all basically started to come up with the idea basically that science and Christianity were opposed to each other. And that unfortunately got some traction, and it continues to today. And I gotta tell you, this is a lie. So, and unfortunately, these books have caused some to lose their faith entirely. And even I cited one where a guy even committed suicide over it. He was so disparaged by what he had learned by reading this book. One of Dawkins' books titled The God Delusion. So, in the book, Dawkins says anybody who believes in God is delusional. This is the sort of thing that he's promoting.
You lost your audio. If you're recording off that audio, you lost it.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, well, maybe the battery on this went out. Hear me now? Ah, it's back on now. I'm not sure what happened, but anyway. Mysterious, I guess. So I think, again, one of the major reasons I want to teach this kind of information is to show that science and Christianity and what the Bible says are in perfect harmony with each other. God is the origin of everything. And it would include all the scientific principles that govern the way our universe operates. And we'll see that over and over and over again as we look through this. Science is not the enemy. Science is, we should embrace it, actually. And we go back to, again, these early scientists. I think I lost it again, didn't I? Go back to these early scientists prior to the 1800s, like Newton and Faraday, some of the other giants of that time, like Boyle and Kepler, were all creationists. They all believed in God. They saw design in the universe. And so this drove them to do what they did. So again, I just want to make sure we understand that having this information just gives us so much confidence. I think the Bible is true. Plus it gives us a way to reach out to others. I think I have started so many conversations with people talking about things like this. It's just a great way. So anyway, we were talking about the rupture phase. I'm going through the phases of the hydroplate theory, what happens and what occurs in different orders. Let's try this microphone again. Hello? Back on again?
Yeah.
okay, not sure what's going on, but
Probably his battery.
could be the battery, yeah. So, anyway, we're going through the phases of the hydroplate theory, and I've given out a handout, which I could give out if you don't have one, that goes through the overall phases of the hydroplate theory. There's 4 basic phases, but the first phase is called the rupture phase, and this is basically when the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and what happens during that phase, this first phase. So during this phase, we are going to look into what we are going to call the origin and formation of comets, asteroids, meteoroids, and what are called trans-neptunian objects. And also included in this section, I'm going to do a part that will be explaining some of the mysterious features of the moon. The moon has some really unusual features to it, and there is some very strong evidence that the moon has received 5 extremely major impacts, and all of them, interestingly enough, come from the direction of Earth. So when you look at the moon faces us. It has an orbit that's locked in such a way so we always see one face of the moon. We never see the far side of the moon. But this near side of the moon that we see has evidence of major impacts that have happened to the moon that originated from the direction of Earth. So this alone is another very important evidence of what happened during the flood, when the fountains of the great deep burst forth in such a manner where it would expel material out past Earth's atmosphere and out into outer space, and it would be responsible. We can show scientific reasons where it would form comets and asteroids and meteoroids, and what happened to the moon. And it becomes a very powerful evidence of that's what the flood, what happened when the fountains of the great deep burst forth. So. And then we'll also see that evolutionary theory contains speculations again. They don't have any answers. And this is what's so powerful with this information too, is that there's nothing on the other side. I mean, as you look into evolutionary theory, you see the same things happening over and over again. It's a theory that's based on guesses. It's based on imagination. It starts with a preconceived assumption that excludes any aspect of there being a creator or a supernatural, and therefore they have an initial assumed error, and everything else that they come up with after that builds upon that error because they have the wrong starting point. I guess it would be sort of like if I gave you driving directions to go from Los Angeles to New York, and I said, okay, drive 5 miles and turn right, and then drive 150 miles and turn left, and gave you specific instructions. And then I had you start in Miami instead with the same instructions. Would you end up in New York? Well, of course not. I mean, this is what evolution has as its problems. They have initial starting error, and errors, compact on top of errors because they're the wrong starting point. They're not starting from the right point here. And such, again, is the case here looking at the origins of these objects in our solar system. So the evolutionary scenario in the textbooks give 2 possible explanations for the origins of these objects. One, they're either the remains of an unexploded planet, or they are a planet that failed to evolve completely. However, experts in the field, these fields, recognize that there's significant problems with both of these explanations, and they're actually puzzled by what they say. For example, the most popular explanation today for the origins of asteroids is their bodies that did not merge to become a planet. And of course, they never explain how, in nearly empty space, matter merges to become rocky bodies. In the first place, we have this problem with the formation of the solar system. The supposed formation of the solar system is that out in outer space, somehow, materials just come together and never have an explanation of how, in the vastness of space, how these objects could merge together. But hydroplate theory gives us a very plausible scientific answer to this. Only vague explanations are given for these things. And I think any claim to understand how this planet or planets fail to form then lacks credibility. So if you can't explain how a planet formed in the first place, how can you explain how one would fail to form? I mean, it's like, you can't explain why these planets form. It's a necessity, again, out of evolutionary thought. It's because it's there, okay, therefore, without God, it had to form somehow, right? And then it leads you down some pretty crazy paths. This happens again. I'm looking through everything from origins of life to origins of planets and solar systems, everything. It's all speculatory. It's really quite stunning when you see it. So today, if we had things coming together, we would see collisions would scatter this material. It wouldn't actually cause them to come together or form together. And during the 4.6 billion years that evolutionists say asteroids have existed, they would have had so many collisions that they would be much more fragmented than they are today. So another possible explanation, that could be more creationist based, would be that the origins of stars, planets, and the galaxies would include comets and asteroids and meteoroids and trans-neptunian objects, or something that a special creator created during creation week. So when we look at creation science, there's really two events we're going to look into. One is the creation week, where the Bible talks about everything being created, everything. Creation ends at the end of the creation week. That's it. There's no more creating that happens after the end of the creation week. The second event would be the global flood. So these are the two events that we look into when we talk about creation science. But thinking that God created these objects during the creation week doesn't really make sense, because some of these objects, like comets and asteroids, could actually be harmful to the Earth. We see meteoroids come back to Earth and actually crash into Earth and come down and do damage here. That doesn't seem like it fits with this very good aspect. Okay, what would be the purpose of these? It just doesn't fit. So the only other theory that makes any sense, or the idea that makes any sense, is that it came from the flood. Okay, it didn't come from the creation week. It leaves the flood as the other possible alternative. And hydroplate theory does offer a simple and very complete solution that's consistent with scientific principles, and at the same time, it is exactly what we'd expect according to Scripture. Of course, Scripture isn't a science book. It doesn't tell us how these things happen, but we can look now at scientific principles and see that they match what we would expect if Scripture were true. And hydroplate theory, we can show that they would have formed later during the flood, based on the beginning assumption of the hydroplate theory of this vast amount of trapped subterranean water below the Earth's crust, which we talked about in the last quarter that we taught the class. But basically, in a nutshell, hydroplate theory, one major assumption is that when the Earth is formed, and is described in Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 10, it talks about a separation of waters above and below a division, which is the rakia. The Hebrew word is rakia, which basically is a plating, I believe, of the Earth. Rakia is a very closely related word to the word raka. Raka is a word that means to plate something, means to cover or plate, much as if you would plate an idol, let's say, with gold. You'd hammer out a thin sheet of gold to cover an idol or cover a plate. Raka is very closely related to rakia. And there are multiple verses in the Old Testament that talks about God raka the earth. Very interesting, because it now, in a creation context, like Psalms 136, 5 through 9, says that God raka, not rakia, raka the earth upon the waters. This, to me, is extremely strong evidence that says, yes, there was a plating, there was a covering of the earth with waters underneath. Words in Genesis 1, 6 through 8 talk about a division, badal, a division of waters above, waters below, basically splitting the waters in half the waters above this rakia, this expanse, half the waters below. And it's that trapped subterranean water that is the source of the flood waters, as referenced in 2 Peter 3, when it says this was the water that was reserved for judgment. And it all fits. It all makes perfect sense when you look at it this way. And again, hydroplate theory makes a number of predictions that are very testable. Numbers of these have come to be found to be correct. I'll go through, I'll give you some examples of those as we go through that. So this, of course, increases our confidence in this theory quite a bit. So as we look at what would have happened in this rupture phase, we see an explosion, this tremendous amount of weight and pressure of the crust on the top of the subterranean waters. Over the centuries after the creation week would have created a tremendous amount of heat in the subterranean chambers, tremendous amount of weight above from the plates that are above it. These plates are estimated by Dr. Brown to be about 60 miles thick. And when a rupture happens in the crust, this release of heat and the weight and the kinetic energy, and there's also radioactive energy involved with this as well. We'll get into that later in the class too, where we look into the origin of the Earth's radioactivity. Is that this would have put tremendous amount of energy into the crust, and it would have given a way that they could have expelled all this out into outer space. There's enough forces to do that. So there's an amazing amount of forces involved in this. So when they burst forth, of course, we know about the 40 days and 40 nights of rain that occurs. This is torrential rain. This is the Geshem rain, this Hebrew word that this is not our average rain. This is rain that is intense, much more intense than normal rain. But some of this material would have enough velocity because of the forces involved to be ejected out into outer space beyond Earth's atmosphere. And this escape velocity that's necessary to launch rocks in muddy water out beyond the atmosphere has been calculated to be about 7 miles per second or greater. So if you could shoot something out of a cannon at 7 miles a second or greater, you could shoot it out of Earth's atmosphere if you had that kind of speed. Dr. Brown, though, has done calculations on this energy release, and he's calculated that the explosion of the fountains of the Great Deep would have produced speeds of these objects around 32 miles per second. So over 4 times the minimum speed that would be necessary to expel this out into outer space. So we're talking about easily some of this material would have got ejected out beyond Earth's atmosphere. In general, too, also lighter particles like dirt, water droplets, and smaller rocks would have launched with greater velocity than heavier objects. The heavier rocks then would merge to become asteroids. We'll talk about asteroids as well, which are basically clumps of rock held together loosely by water. This is another prediction of Dr. Brown that came true, is that when you investigate asteroids, you'll find that they're not one big rock, they're piles of rock. And I'll give you a reason why they would come together in just a minute here. So the big question is, of course, evolutionary theory says, there was an exploded planet, right? Well, what planet exploded? Okay, what are you talking about? I think we're standing on the planet that exploded, okay? This planet fragmented, and it provides, with hydroplate theory and with this fountains of the Great Deep, it provides a mechanism that's scientifically supported that would have launched this material out into outer space. So astronomers are trying to describe this, but I don't think they realize they're standing on the planet that exploded. Maybe they're just too close to actually be able to even see it. So this chart here shows the trapped subterranean chambers here that we were talking about, the hydroplates above, and then as the fountains of the Great Deep burst forth, this would have expelled a tremendous amount of material out through the openings, with enough force to expel it into outer space. So that gives you a good side view of the hydroplates, basically, what Dr. Brown has termed hydroplates. So the formation of these objects, comets and asteroids and meteors, and interstellar dust, again, evolutionary theory only guesses at it, but hydroplate theory gives an explanation of this. So I now want to look at a little bit more about what these things are actually made up of, because this is really telling. This is really important. First, it's been observed that we know comets are made up of about 38% water in the form of ice. We'll talk a bit about more comets in just a moment as well. But asteroids are also sometimes called minor planets, and they're loose collections of smaller rocks held together by water and ice. And most of them are found orbiting between Mars, the 4th planet from the Sun, and Jupiter, the fifth planet from the Sun. And according to evolutionary theory, most asteroids are claimed to have been remnants of the leftover formation of the early formation of the universe about 4.6 billion years ago. But we'll soon reveal that their formation cannot occur, these objects could not occur unless there were very special circumstances allowing them to form. So evolutionists can claim that the solar system condensed out of a vast cloud of swirling dust, but gas and dust clouds in the expanse of space will actually expand away from each other. They won't coalesce into making planets. They will expand away from each other, making it impossible for them to actually clump together. But again, we'll see now that there's some scientifically supported evidence that supports the unusual characteristics that would have to be available to have these objects form. So there were some special circumstances that Hydroplate theory solves. Significantly also, when you look at what they're made up of, they're found to contain salt and silicates. And salt, of course, we're all familiar with, of course. Silicates are a class of chemical compounds that contain silicon and oxygen atoms with various structures. And these compounds are the foundation of the Earth's crust. They make up about 95% of the Earth's crust. So keep this in mind. Okay? This is what's found in these things, but it matches exactly what comes from Earth. And they contain atoms in a highly ordered and three-dimensional repeating pattern. And a common example of this would be quartz and feldspar and mica. These are common materials found in our Earth's crust. And the formation of these arrangements requires special conditions, though. These conditions require temperatures above 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit and slow cooling under pressure in order for the crystal structures to grow. However, outer space is an environment with no pressure and near absolute zero temperature conditions. So if you realize that absolute zero is the coldest possible temperature, it's like 400 and something degrees below zero, it becomes hard to imagine that you could find a temperature above 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit in outer space, which is a special condition needed to form these things, these silicates. So if evolutionary theory is correct, how could this possibly form in the outer vastness of outer space? We also find in these comets and asteroids and meteoroids, we found limestone and clays. And we know that limestone and clay require a body of liquid water to form. So how could this happen in outer space? So there's no bodies of water out there, right? How did that happen? So the Earth contains a vast amount of limestone, a huge amount. We'll cover that in the later class as well. And then there was another interesting discovery in 2011 where the mineral cubanite was reported in a comet. It was a comet named Wilt 2, and it's pronounced Wilt 2, not spelled W-I-L-T. And it was named after a Swiss astronomer named Paul Wilt. And he discovered this comet in 1978. And cubanite is a relatively rare mineral found in high-temperature ore deposits and only forms in scalding hot water between 122 degrees Fahrenheit and 392 degrees Fahrenheit. But cubanite was found in these samples collected by the NASA's Stardust mission from a comet when it collected samples of this comet in 2004 and then returned it to Earth in 2006. So the presence of these collected dust grains provided evidence that pockets of liquid water existed on this comet at some point, and this was a surprising discovery. There's always surprising discoveries to the evolution. This isn't super common. It's always a surprising discovery for what they would have expected in comets. So why? Comets don't reach these temperatures required to form cubanite. And how could they have formed in the absence of water? There's no water there. This again is another example of what should not be there according to evolutionary theories. And again, they're always surprised. But the Hydroplate theory again can provide a scientifically sound explanation for this. Comets, asteroids, and meteors also contain a common silicate mineral found in Earth's crust and mantle called olivine, and it's known as olivine due to its olive green color. And it's also concentrated with iron and nickel in some meteors. It's seems like quite a coincidence that this mineral is not only found on Earth, but in these objects in space as well. So finding of olivine and comets and asteroids was predicted by Dr. Brown. It was clearly written in an 8th edition of his book from 2001. Then NASA confirmed this in 2006 during the Stardust mission with the findings on Comet 2. So Dr. Brown was able to correctly predict that this is what they would find. This is exactly what they found. Iron-nickel alloys and meteors also contain this unique Wildenstatten, Wildenstatten pattern showed here on the inside of the screen. It's a unique pattern, it's intricate, it has cross-hatch designs, interlocking nickel and iron crystals found etched on the surface of iron meteorites. And this pattern only forms in a uniform temperature of at least 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. So once again, it's hard to reconcile finding this on a meteor when outer space isn't supposed to have this kind of temperature. So the conditions found right here on Earth seem in abundance, strikingly similar to what are found on these objects, right? I mean, what does that start to tell you? And finally, probably the most perplexing, most amazing part of this is that organic compounds are found on these, like amino acids and bacteria. Organic compounds are, of course, from living things and on the basis of life containing complex molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and nucleic acids and hydrocarbons. And these complex molecules and materials like amino acids and even bacteria are found in these objects. And it's beginning to sound with all these unique features, they match what's here on Earth. Could they potentially have had a earthly origin? So of course, without question, the Earth's surface, as you see here in green, has plentiful amounts of organics on it, right? Organic material. There's plentiful organics found all over the surface of the Earth. And the things you find in organics, materials are found on these objects. Of course, the evolutionists will tell you that's what seeded life here on Earth. Okay. But again, I don't think that's the case. So again, all these objects like comets and asteroids and space dust share so many common features to what's found here on Earth. What do you think might have been the origin, right? What makes logical sense? All the possibilities should be considered, but probability suggests it's more than likely that the material of these outer space objects had an earthly origin. So while there's a lot of speculation over the origins of these things, and the trace organics, the evidence shows you and strongly suggests we're probably standing on it. Now, I showed a video on YouTube last quarter, which was really interesting. It was a young girl who got super excited over findings that they were finding on asteroids. They found all kinds of organic material like this. She was like, she couldn't believe it. I mean, they found amino acids, they found all kinds of organic material. And again, it surprises them. The evolutionists are just completely surprised by this. I'll make sure a link to that gets into the video, video that will go on our YouTube channel as well, if you want to see that again. I won't take the time to do it again because we did it before. So let's discuss comets now, a little bit deeper, so we can get a little bit more idea of how and why they operate. And so comets, they're probably one of the more dynamic, spectacular, and variable, mysterious bodies that are out there in our solar system. And so fear of comets, as omens of death and catastrophes existed in most of the ancient cultures. In fact, comets were called disasters, which comes from the Greek word dis, meaning evil, and aster, meaning star. So thus disaster comes from the word, these two words being put together, it doesn't mean really it's evil star. So comets also orbit the sun, and most of them do, in what's called an elliptical orbit. And when closest to the sun, some comets travel at more than 350 miles per second, while others at the furthest point of from the sun, we'll show these elliptical orbits in just a minute here, could spend years and years traveling at less than 15 miles an hour. So there's a big range. A few comets travel so fast, too, that they actually escape our solar system and are gone forever. So some of the comets would have escaped even the solar system's gravitational forces. But a typical comet, when far from the sun, it basically looks like a dirty, misshapen snowball, sometimes a few miles across. As we said before, about 38% of its mass is frozen water. But this ice is extremely fluffy, which means there's a lot of space between the ice particles. And the rest is dust and various chemicals. So the question might arise, can we determine what these chemicals are and what they're made up of? So much remains unknown, but the light from a comet tail can be analyzed to identify some of the molecules that the comets are made up of, since each type of molecule absorbs and gives off specific colors of light. So using this method, they've been able to determine that they contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and remarkably organic materials we just discussed. This is how they figured out what were in these things. And a range of organisms like plants and animals, including trace amounts of the amino acid glycine, which is a complex building block of life on Earth, and also methane. And on Earth, bacteria produce most all of methane. So the question would be, how could comets, thought by most to have originated in outer space, have a high concentration of methane and these other compounds? So early scientists discovered other types of organic materials in comets, similar to the organic matter of unquestioned biological origin on Earth. This was a quote that they said. This is of unquestioned biological origin from Earth. It's so similar. And because of this amazing similarity to the organic material found here on Earth, today a popular belief is that comets brought life to Earth. However, I think there's compelling reasons that the opposite is the case. Comets may contain traces of life similar to what's on Earth because they came from here. They came from Earth itself. And then comets also, it's interesting too that they can say something about the age of our solar system as well. The information that we're about to cover here, I think, is insanely important. I mean, I think this is one of the most amazing things that I probably have found in all my studies of creation science. We observe that each time a comet orbits around the sun, it loses some of its mass or size. And some of its mass is burned off each time it passes near the sun. Sometimes they also collide with planets, moons, and even the sun itself. By measuring the mass of the comets and the amount of loss over time, we can conclude that comets, especially those that make frequent passes, can't be very old. In fact, the observed rate of comets, as far as their deterioration, indicates that all comets should be all gone in as little as 10 to 12,000 years. At this rate, obviously all comets would have disintegrated far before billions of years ago, right? 10 to 12, even if that's off by a little bit, I mean, we're not talking billions of years here. They acknowledge that present comets, when evolutionists are confronted by this, are young, but they're still convinced that the solar system is very old. So how do they reconcile this contradiction? How do they come up, they propose a way that comets can be here in our solar system, be observed, that are in this 10 to 12,000 year old range. So in typical evolutionary form, they come up with a rescue device. They call this the Oort Cloud. It's basically called a comet nursery. It's a theoretical nursery discovered or proposed, it wasn't discovered, it was proposed, by a Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort. And it's a cloud, supposedly, of predominantly icy disks of space debris that's believed to orbit around the sun. And Oort claimed that the interstellar events occasionally dislodge some of this material from this cloud, and thus furnishes our solar system with an inexhaustible supply of fresh comets. So do you follow the logic there? First assumption is the solar system is very old. Right? We observe that the comets live for a relatively short time. We can't deny that. Then they conclude that young, youthful comets are continually being supplied by some faraway unseen source. When the solar system, old solar system advocates are asked about the young solar system, and their response is, oh, we've solved that. Comets are now being replenished by the Oort Cloud. Okay, so without any proof of this, they just say this is the Oort Cloud solves this, you know? So is there any reason to believe this? Is there any evidence for an Oort Cloud at all, anywhere? It's this pattern of twisted logic that continuously you see in evolutionary science. And again, circular reasoning comes in, rears this ugly head. Something's assumed to be true because it must be true to fit the model. And again, is this science? You know, it seems like a rescue device to me. But the theory must be protected. And that's what these people think. No matter what it says, no matter what the evidence is against it, they have to they have to protect the theory no matter what, no matter how flimsy or lacking the evidence is. And then they dismiss the observations made by careful scientists. I mean, and they say that no true scientist can be a creationist or believe in the Bible. I guess they must think that Isaac Newton, Louis Pasteur, Faraday, and the greats of the past were all idiots, I guess. I don't know, I'm not really sure what they think. But again, these giants of the past, science, were Bible-believing Christians and creationists, and they did study from a scriptural worldview. So I think it's just a convenient fantasy. So I'm going to look a little bit more further at this Oort Cloud theory and get a perspective of what they're proposing and the problems with this theory. So what we're being taught to expect by evolutionary theory is the Oort Cloud attempts to explain the origin of comets, and most cosmologists agree that the source of most comets must be a cloud of material, termed the Oort Cloud, composed of trillions of comets in a spherical shell surrounding the solar system, a cloud that's so far away nobody's ever seen it or been able to detect it. This is the way they think. Okay. And then we ran out of time. We're going to pick up here next week.
Thank you, Steve.
This is pretty stunning stuff. And then you see the rest of this.
It is.